This is Latitude at Frontline, and I'm your host, Nirupama Subramanian. In this episode, we'll be discussing developments in Bangladesh, where Dr. Muhammad Yunus, the chief advisor, conveyed through a representative a few days ago that he was going to step down because of non-cooperation by various stakeholders. The announcement raised concerns about more uncertainty in Bangladesh. He also hinted that the continuing disorder in the country was the work of defeated forces, in quotes, and a foreign power. While the 84-year-old Yunus has since stepped back from the decision, the uncertainty continues amid reports, too, that differences have developed between him and the Bangladesh army. To discuss these and other developments in our eastern neighbor, my guest today is Dr. Sriradha Datta, a professor of international relations at O.P. Jindal Global University. Her area of specialization is South Asia and the extended Indian neighborhood, Southeast Asia, the Bay of Bengal, and the Indo-Pacific. She studies cross-border issues, security, and bilateral ties in the region. Bangladesh is a special focus for her, and she's written and edited several books about the country. Welcome to Latitude, Dr. Datta.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Datta, let me begin by asking you what you make of this sudden announcement by Dr. Yunus that he wished to quit, and then equally suddenly or equally quickly his withdrawal of that decision. So was this just a trial balloon? Was he testing the waters to gauge how people responded, how various stakeholders responded? Or was it a pressure tactic to get political parties to stop pulling in different directions? Or did he really mean it seriously? Is he sick of it all, but has been persuaded to stay on?
I would think it's actually a mix of all those three, basic factors that you mentioned. Yes, there was a lot of, as you yourself in introductory remarks said, there's a lot of different variant voices that we've heard, very at times divisive voices also, and different stakeholders who had a different point of view, not necessarily something that Dr. Yunus was voicing. Also, there was a problem with the roadmap at the elections. We've seen BNP and others want, December early elections. There's the student leaders, the Jamaat Islami, they want elections to be deferred because clearly their ground is not ready for it as yet. So all of this and the question of the reforms, which Dr. Yunus had himself said in his early days that anything from 1 year to 3 years. So, it was very kept widely open. Then, of course, we've seen Bangladesh go through very turbulent times post-August. So, and the fact that law and order, social cohesion was an issue, of course. And also this issue, which he said it, I think, openly, that he's frustrated, he's exasperated, he's not happy trying to do this. But I think that all-party meeting, which took place 2 days ago, was basically I think putting faith on him, because at this point of juncture, if he steps down, there's going to be political mayhem again. And I'm not saying that everything is back to order. The huge issues of the fundamental reforms that he had talked about initial days, we still haven't seen all that unrolling, but it's been a difficult task for this interim government. The issues of misgovernance that we saw, there are many other problems that this interim government has been grappling with. Some we often see, and I think the interim government can be blamed on them also. A few of the issues that we've seen just now, but all in all, I think everybody agreed at this point of time, all the stakeholders, the best way forward is Professor Yunus. He's, of course, as you know, has been the nationwide choice in August. Everybody, there's not a single voice which is dissenting in his taking over as chief advisor. Now the issue, and I think that's what he mentioned yesterday, that he's not going to stay beyond 30th June of next year. So clearly, whether it's December, anytime between December and June, elections should be held. And I think as soon as an electoral roadmap is announced publicly, things will start falling in place.
So, as you mentioned, it's the Bangladesh National Party and the military too that have been demanding that elections should be held early, and they've said by December this year. would they be happy about this rather extended timeline that he has given himself? He has said that he's not going to stay a day beyond June 30th, 2026. Now, that's another year. Is that going to be acceptable to the BNP and the military, particularly, which have pressed for early elections?
Yes, I think, as I said, there are, the particular stakeholders who are desiring, early elections. Of course, BNP certainly, because they know this is a good time for them. I mean, there's a huge wave in their favor at this point of time, which they don't want to miss out on. That's of course the case. But again, he has mentioned about reforms, and we don't know how much of reforms is actually possible. We know about the reform commissions. I think the basic reform everybody agrees on is the electoral reforms. And as far as I remember, the website, the Election Commission has already got the voters list out, where, basically people can address the anomalies, any gaps or whatever the problems. So it's out open for the, people to, the public to react to that. And some other basic reforms would be in place so that at least, a free and fair multi-party elections are held in a robust way. That's of course first and foremost. Now, what about the other reforms? We don't know as yet. And I think Professor Yunus from day one had mentioned that he really, I mean, his promise was about good governance, fundamental changes. All of that will not be possible by December for sure. But at the same time, even for these reforms to, take shape, you would need all party consensus. But many of the reform reports have been, accepted by the interim government, but now they have to have a process where everybody is on board with it, right? And there is an opinion that an elected government is best suited for this purpose. But I think this works against the fact that interim wanted to address the issues of misgovernance and other problems that the government had at that point of time. So there is that bit of, so we haven't heard of a roadmap, and clearly there will be that particular stakeholder pushing for December. And the army, of course, we've seen the army chief say that at least twice over, that he was asking for early December elections. But let's see, maybe it will be December. We don't know as yet, because I think that, there's some discussion being held almost on a daily basis for the last few days. So we'll get to hear about that soon.
So shouldn't Professor Yunus be really concentrating on holding the election? And as you said, these reforms are best addressed by an elected government and an inclusive government, or an inclusive process that takes into account all political parties, the views of all political parties. Why is he actually got into this this whole process of I want to do these reforms before the elections, and where is that coming from?
I'm just thinking from the earlier point of view. If you recall, Bangladesh between 2006 and 2008 had a similar interregnum period when it was a caretaker government who was actually, there, the front face of the government, while the army was really the main support system there. And at that point of time, there was this lot of these -2 formula, all of these new different things were being floated. Finally, we saw 2008 December, which was a very, very, a free and fair, robust election being held. But there has been opinion by many Bangladeshis at that point of time that many reforms, of course, they did have excellent electoral reforms, but many reforms that the government needed, the nation needed, wasn't undertaken. To the kind of deep-rooted, the systemic problems that the Bangladesh has. So similarly now, and I have spoken to some of the advisors at a much earlier day, when they also talked about the fact that the very deep-rooted systemic problems which needs to be addressed. But as I've just argued, I don't think it's possible to address them overnight. There's like institutions need to be built. There has to be a change in the way, governance is structured. Of course, there has been some reforms, I believe, unfolding at the banking sector, which was in a dismal condition earlier. Economy has picked up to some extent, but again, many of the economic reforms that were suggested by the commission report hasn't been undertaken, because again, these are long-term issues. So I think the opinion of Professor Yunus and some of them who back him, suggests that suppose it went to elections straight away, which whatever time it does, the country was going to go back to the same chaos, the same mayhem of not being able to address the systemic problems. Now, my other argument is that actually, even if you do bring in very strong reforms and try and rebuild, What is to say a political party who has overwhelming majority in the parliament is not going to come and overrule all of that? We've
Mm.
seen earlier government of Awami League do that. I mean, they were using their brute majority in the parliament to usher in any laws that they wanted. So I'm just saying that it's a political culture which needs to be addressed. And it can't be done just through paper. I mean, people of Bangladesh themselves have to agree, all of them, that this is the culture they will, disband, and they will now try and see how you can have robust systems in place and how, it's not corrosive in nature, but it was at some time ago.
You talked about the political culture, and when Professor Yunus said he wanted to quit because he was not being allowed to govern, uh, how is this really manifesting itself in day-to-day Bangladesh? What is actually happening? Draw a picture for us of what is the problem today in Bangladesh. We are hearing about protests, we are hearing about vandalism, mobs. What is actually happening on the ground?
So what we saw immediately in the aftermath of, the 5th August uprising, we've seen different stakeholders suddenly jump in. Now, students, of course, was the front face of that movement, and they spearheaded that particular campaign and movement against, what they thought was extremely corrupt and a leader that they didn't want. So now, often we've seen when students, I mean, there should have been an attempt. I mean, suddenly we saw even, school students campaign for like change of rescheduling of exams. So suddenly the whole country was awakening to the fact that if we all go out on the street in masses, we want to get our, wish list done. So we've seen all kinds of people, whether they work in the government or other sectors, come out on the road in that particular mood and temper at that point of time that, okay, we can do this through street power, street show. I think that needed to be addressed immediately. And I think, Professor Yunus, I think in his, how would I say, willingness to engage with all the stakeholders, because he felt the previous regime wasn't engaging, especially the youth was a large faction that seemed to be left out of the government structure at that point of time, or even at the, other sectors. He probably, I thought, gave them too much of space, essentially. Which, I mean, of course, there's a huge, I would say, I mean, how should I say, a very, very positive scene that you've seen how they've been able to take, the movement forward, and how they have a kind of opinion and they have an idea of Bangladesh which is different from that corrupt, Bangladesh at that point of time. But at the same time, then we suddenly see a lot of these, what we loosely term as Islamist elements suddenly out and voicing. I mean, maybe at a political level, they probably have absolutely no space. I don't think any Bangladeshis will ever vote for these political elements. But their social space was suddenly too much. And even today, I mean, sitting in India, we hear such crazy videos coming to us all the time about what, I think that we hadn't seen that in the past, because, the Awami League government was very strong and harsh about that. They, of course, was happily, living with Hefazat, which is again, I think the entire Hefazat group was given legitimacy by the cohabitation that Awami League did with it, because till then who had known about them really.
Mhm.
And now we see the kind of noises, especially anti-woman noises that are coming out of, Bangladesh. So those elements, and again, their street power is immense. These Islamist elements, they hopefully have absolutely zero, electoral presence, but their street power, their social power is a lot. So that is another element that we came out. Then we, of course, saw BNP, and BNP again, is in a position of strength at this point of time, because after many years of being in the wilderness, they've seen their chance, right? That they're going to, this is the opportune moment for them where they need to really hit the iron when it's strong. So clearly they were also trying to send different messages, saying different things. Then, of course, the latest controversy we've seen about the NSA, that appointment, and then of course, the army chief. There's been a kind of an attempt, but maybe I don't know whether it's a media house built or whatever, that as if the interim and the army chief is not on the same page. I somehow would tend to disagree with that.
I was
Uh,
just going to come to that really,
okay.
that he seemed to suggest he held a meeting recently, and in a speech to his officers, he seemed to suggest that there were differences between the army and the interim administration, and over some decisions that had been taken by the interim administration. He said these were strategic decisions on which the army should have been consulted. But since then, the army spokesman has also held a press conference and sort of walked back on these statements and played down the differences, really. So, what really is that relationship now? You're saying that it's not as as difficult or as strained as it is made out to be?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, they don't have to be on the same page on every issue, but I think the main controversy which we saw out in the public domain, I don't really know what inside story is on the humanitarian corridor.
What is this humanitarian corridor? Can you please explain?
So this is basically a kind of a space they wanted to create, I mean, the common border where Bangladesh would provide material, for like food and any such essential items for the people of the Rakhine region who didn't even have at that point of time, gas to cook their food on. There was no edible oil available, and the aftermath of the not only the earthquake but also of the huge violent, situation that continues to exist there. So it was all about addressing those hapless population there. I think the army chief reacted to that because clearly, as you mentioned, this is a strategic decision. It is something to do with external, power. So army, of course, needed to be consulted. And I don't think the consultation process actually just happened. There were probably some, meetings taking place, somebody suggesting, I think there were a couple of track two meetings also being held on this subject, I know. And so there was a kind of, I think the whole chronology was such that even before Professor Yunus or the interim would sit together on it, there was somebody who's saying that, okay, we've decided to go for it. And I think then the media advisor said, no, nothing of the sort. We've not decided on anything as yet. This is a matter of discussion going on at this point of time. Also, as you know, the appointment of the NSA happened in between. NSA was also on, I think he was, I'm forgetting his exact term before, advisor to Myanmar affairs or something like that. And then, so maybe there was a bit of a power jostling happening because, all this while, the first initial months we've seen the army chief in control is the one who was able to bring stability to the, very virulent situation at that point of time. So suddenly we find another kind of a security personnel there. So maybe that is what, and I think then we've seen BNP do a demand, and I think, I don't know what decision was finally done about two issues. One is, that how two of the student leaders are part of the interim. And why they should not be, because they're part of the NCP. So that was one argument they done. And also they felt that, they had some reservations about the NSA also.
So they wanted him to step down as well.
That's right. So as of now, we've not, it was in all of this that, when I think we've seen that very exasperated statement by Professor Yunus saying that threatening to quit because he was, getting pulled on all sides. But I think things have, as you mentioned, have cooled down just now. And there hasn't been any decision taken really on this particular aspect as yet.
But has the crisis blown over? I mean, are things now going to be easy for Professor Yunus from this point onwards, because everybody has now seen that he's prepared to step down if they don't fall in line. So is everybody going to fall in line?
It's very difficult to say that about Bangladeshis. They're extremely, given to emotions and given to histrionics, of course. So, I mean, if something, goes out to untoward, then I don't know the reaction. But largely, I would say, especially the political stakeholders, I think they do understand that it's important to have stability here because otherwise nobody wins. I mean, even the whatever, I mean, NCP is just a very nascent political party. They haven't had any presence as yet. But for even to claim whatever they want to, it's only possible when there's a stable and, governance, structure at this point of time to walk that path. Again, otherwise it would be, difficult for every political stakeholder to actually make their mark. So I think for their own sake, they will ensure. But again, there's always this particular element in Bangladesh. And as I said, what we saw, and I think that's been a huge issue about India, that we saw the Islam is being given a very open hand. suddenly out of the blue. And we've seen many decisions, people be released from the prison, though they're having served good 15 years or whatever. So all of that, suddenly we thought that there was too much of space being given to them. We don't know how, which way the narrative was going to be taken away. That those kind of elements continue to be there, because I'm sure everybody has, I mean, that message has come out very strongly from the interim that they're anything but, Islamist or conservative in that sense. I mean, they really wanted to build a very democratic liberal order.
So what
So,
are they doing to rein in these Islamists? Are they being able to do that?
no, I don't think, I mean, one doesn't see that really. But the fact that, as we were just discussing, that we've seen the Amir of Jamaat give a statement like that he's sorry for their past deeds or whatever, which is also something new. I haven't seen Jamaat do that earlier. So clearly, again, Jamaat now is positioning itself as a political player, because, as you know, in the past, BNP and Jamaat have always, worked as alliance partners in the elections. In fact, even in certain instances when Awami League received Jamaat support from outside the parliament. So Jamaat has been a kind of, in fact, in one of my books, I've actually called it the queen maker in Bangladesh.
Mhm.
But they were never able to gain much of electoral strength or presence. Now I think they're changing their tactics.
But, but Jamaat is not really Islamist in that sense. It's not. It's a regular political outfit,
That's
isn't it?
yeah.
So who are these Islamists who we are
So
talking about, who have been released from jail and who are
so
causing all this mayhem on, also
so
anti-Hindu violence
yeah.
and, instrumental in kind of uh, spoiling the relationship with India as well? Who are these
I
people?
think these elements are part of not necessarily just Hifazat, but many small groups like this who were also been accused of terror attacks in the past and very violent acts in the past. They are the ones who are out on the street now. I mean, having whether they served their term or whatever the case may be, judiciary thought fit to let them go, because in some instances that I checked, because there were some very well-known names, they said that even despite 10 years having served a prison term, there was not a single sentence which was charged against them. So that the security apparatus wasn't able to do that. So how long does a man stay in serve sentence without being actually charged for any particular act of
Hmm.
violence or whatever? So that has been the case for several of those elements who've been let loose. But again, there are kind of, there has been suddenly, I mean, I think even Bangladeshi friends that I speak to, they said we've never seen these kind of elements, and they say we are very ourselves, we don't know who they are and where are they suddenly emerged from. So clearly they were, suddenly they found this space where they can make their noises and create, as I said, their social ability to create social mayhem and, the noises on the street is very hard. I mean, street power for them is really, really strong. And so they've been saying, as I said, they've taken anti-woman positions. They've done something, a lot of these things about the national anthem, for instance, that the national anthem will not be invoked anymore, and all of these kind of things which has been not really been part of Bangladeshi how should I say for many years. These elements were always there, but
So,
that we didn't see them. But now suddenly many groups, and I don't know where their alliances come from, who they are actually connected to, who's funding them. There's a kind of a very black hole here about their presence.
so if they are really, if they are unpopular in, as you say, I mean, if they don't have popular support, why is the interim administration reluctant to crack down on against them and say, okay, enough is enough, uh, can't take this anymore? Where is that reluctance coming from?
Um, I just thought, I mean, I also don't know, because we've been wondering ourselves when we discuss Bangladesh as to why we don't see the interim come down much more sharp on them. I mean, we've seen the huge, violence against minorities. Yes, interim government, yes, the student leaders have constantly denounced it and said that we'll try and do whatever we can, but we've still seen huge breaks that were happening constantly. And while in particular recent incidents when I see it about how, Hifazat, I think, mentioned something about, and the Women Commission report that no, it has to be whatever. So one of the women advisors, I remember, went public and said that I'm so surprised the interim government is quiet. I mean, it was the interim government who constituted this commission. So we submitted a report, and now they are quiet. My reading is, and I don't know because my friends in Bangladeshi again are really the ones who are much more, follow the liberal order. They also feel that, and I think that's what I think, that the minute you refute them, they'll be, they'll have more kind of throngs coming up. So it's quietly like, let them make the noise what they want. We will do what we think is right. We will do what is correct. But at the same time, the fact that their presence on the street, of course, I mean, not only Islamist elements, you recall in the first initial years, because of the breakdown of law and order, people were talking about the vandalism that was taking place, the rapes that were happening, houses were being broken into. So huge law and order situation was happening. And I think maybe they didn't have the capacity to do that, to rein them in, because it was in the initial days very fragile, the system. Now slowly and steadily they're coming back, and the security apparatus is in place again. But I don't think they probably had the capacity, and they probably thought the more they go against them, there'll be more such elements rising to the surface. So it was best to not give them too much of importance, let them take it out whichever way it was. But at the same time, the government will do what they think is in the best interest of the nation.
Right. The army has also spoken about not just holding an early election, I mean, by December, but also holding an inclusive election. That's, I think, an indirect demand by the army that the Awami League should be allowed to take part in it. But the Awami League has been banned. So how does this situation get resolved?
This was in fact going to be a tricky point always, and because there is, again, as we've seen it openly, that BNP has said, Awami League should be there as a multi-party, because I mean, their argument is that this is exactly what is happening during Awami League's time, that BNP was not allowed to vote for a variety of reasons. So similarly now, but I think that they have a different reason as to why they're encouraging Awami League's presence in the electoral space. So is the army, of course. I mean, army wants to be equal to all political parties, so why would they want to not? But again, I think here, I wish the judiciary or the legal proceedings would have been far more, how shall I say, hastened. Because that looks really, I mean, it's true that many leaders, and we've seen these instances, Aina Ghor, and huge amount of, they've been all culpable. Many of these leaders who we know have been culpable in hugely humanitarian crisis that has taken place. And so if the legal procedures, the judicial process had started, so what they've done is a ban on Awami League activities till the criminal procedures are not. So why could they not initiate that is something that I've never been able to understand. I wish they had, because I think the entire nation was behind that they would support the legal process to be initiated. That would have addressed many of the problems. So I don't know, and whether it's, I mean, at this point of time, it seems there's a ban on, and I don't think they'll be able to, under the present circumstances, join the electoral landscape. But it's a historical party, it's the largest political party of Bangladesh, so you can't keep them out for long. But let's look at the legal proceedings, let's look at the judicial process, and then one should see. But in the immediate elections, I'm really not sure how it's going to play out, because this is a difficult position. Again, as I said, it's a kind of a inflection moment here, because NCP, the Jamatis, the student leaders definitely don't want Awami League, because they said we are in this position because of what Awami League has done. And on what basis can we then invite again for elections? While BNP, of course, and the argument for us is that then who comes as the opposition leader, as an opposition political party? I mean, that middle ground has completely been, vacuum at this point of time. So sitting in India, we would really hope that a middle ground political party was in a position to capture that space again. Otherwise, we would find elements, maybe Jamaat, maybe others, and Jamaat is probably going to be in a coalition. Are we going to be happy to see them as opposition players now? which is likely in the event of Awami League not participating or not being allowed to participate. But I think that's another dialogue which is still on, and I don't know how they're going to resolve it because many of the leaders, of course, have fled the country. Some of them are serving prison time. But how do you hold them accountable for the misdeeds? And then, but is it possible that just because some of the leaders, maybe 100, maybe 500, that the entire political party should be banned? That's not fair either, right?
So
So,
you have been making the point that the judiciary and the judiciary should have actually started some legal proceedings against the Awami members of the Awami League for the alleged crimes they have committed in the past so many years, including in the closing stages of the Sheikh Hasina government. Uh, so are these so the argument that you're making is that by not starting these proceedings, they are just putting off the whole question about uh, the how to include the Awami League back in the political process. Am I right in understanding that?
yes, exactly so. And yeah, so I mean, the youth leaders and others want to hold them accountable, of course. I mean, given what they've done, I mean, but let's the legal procedure address that, right? It's not an individual decision.
But are these people in the country? Sheikh Hasina is not in the country. There are
No,
demands for
yeah.
extraditing her. So who should these proceedings have begun against then?
There are a handful of them inside Bangladesh who are in serving prison term at this point of time. Also, as you know, there was a crazy number of arrests happened, which which seems so unfounded. I mean, recently, in fact, one very public case happened about a actress who played a particular role in a film on Mujibur Rahman, which is so strange. I mean, and she's been, I think, the allegations against her some murder or something like that. I mean, quite bizarre, really. So clearly, some of these arrests have been completely senseless, I thought. So, of course, as you're saying, it's very, correct reading that most of the leaders have actually fled the country. So, how are you going to start the proceedings? So, I don't know whether individually you can go there and then ban that these are the people against whom proceedings have been done. So, they shouldn't be part of the electoral process. It's a complicated, which is something that they can't deal with it in the next few months, which is going to be a longish process. So, I don't know whether this is part of the discussion at this point of time, but this is really a kind of a serious difference of opinion between the two large different stakeholders.
So, if the Awami League were allowed to participate in the coming election, whenever it's going to be held in this next year, over this year, how would it fare really? Well, how would it perform in these elections? It's not. It's been, uh, its leaders are all over the place. Its membership, it doesn't want to come out openly. Its members don't want to come out openly. Many of them are in hiding. So how would they even perform in these elections?
There is a very basic, I would say, the numbers could be a bit different. 28% strength of voters who always have backed Awami, they continue to be there. They continue to think that Awami is still, what they have put them on that particular position. So even if, let's say, because again, many of the friends and interlocutors I speak to, many of them are Awami supporters. But they've also, quite objectively seen how misgovernance and other problems of the government that is, that we saw for the last several years. So they may lose some supporters, maybe that not the 20. So there's always in that space of 24% or 32%, depending on who you speak to. But there would still be certainly a ground support for Awami. And it doesn't have to be in name of a particular leader, but inside as such as a political party, that they would have that kind of support and strength. Certainly, it has waned in the last couple of years, even before the 2024 election. I mean, if you recall the kind of voters turnout, the official figures were something like 30% or something. I was there only in Dhaka that day. I walked and moved around all over the city, and I gave a number which is not even a double digit. because I didn't see anybody out on the road. So these were Awami League people in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, who didn't come out to vote, right? So you are clearly losing that popular position that you had. So they, but again, at the same time, the whole, I mean, voters vote on a different psychology that even if Awami League did what they did, it is still better than a religious or a more conservative political party or something like that. So it will be more of an anti-vote for somebody else than a pro vote for for Awami at this point of time. But I think, as I said earlier, there will be a vast wave for support for BNP, because they do, and they've been saying some very, very responsible things. At this point of time, none of the leaders have said anything which is untoward or anything not in sync. So they are really positioning themselves as a very dependable, balanced kind of entity at this point of time. So let's see how this goes. But it is Awami League's participation is going to be a critical issue. Yes.
So who's the face of the BNP at this point of time?
The General Secretary, of course, Alamgir, he's really the one who's been there all the time. Everywhere you see him, he's, but we've also seen a lot of these recorded messages coming in from video messages from Tariq Zia, who's sitting in London.
Who's Khaleda Zia's son?
Khaleda Zia has, I think, come back to the country. She was unwell and being treated outside. She's come back. She did look unwell. She did attend some public meeting we saw, but so far, all these years that Khaleda Zia has really been very much under the radar, and Tariq has been sitting in London. It is the General Secretary Alamgir who's really held the party together and been the front face.
And speaking about Awami League, how active is Sheikh Hasina herself in party matters? She's in India in exile, and although the government in Bangladesh keeps accusing her of trying to foment trouble and unrest in Bangladesh, how active is she really in any political matters?
There has been a bit of lull in that, and I don't know whether it was that misinformation, group which has now quieted down. But even till yesterday, we saw, one particular video doing the rounds about how there's an army takeover had happened in Dhaka. And, there was all that, but it was completely farcical stuff that was happening. Initial days and months, we saw Sheikh Hasina relay a lot of messages, lot of phone conversations being released by the party members, because she was constantly in touch with them. And I think that was a point that interim was always saying, that how can she be doing that? And she's been, I mean, the choice of words has not been really very nice about the interim chief and others. So all that was happening. There were many instances when she was addressing the political parties, because in a typical way, the political party really rallies around one name, which is Sheikh Hasina. You'll never see a number two, number three really in Awami League. So it's always been Sheikh Hasina. But last couple of weeks, months, I would say I've not heard much. At least it's, this WhatsApp videos and all these kind of reels that were floating around, because there was a huge, I think, vested group who has been part of this misinformation brigade really. And many believe that Awami League was part of that and has contributed to that substantially.
So she's not doing anything, she's not making any effort to rebuild the party sitting here in India.
I don't think she thinks she needs to rebuild. She thinks the party exists, because every time that she's actually publicly spoken, I mean, through the virtual platform, she's always said that I'm coming back. I mean, I think the last whatever time I've heard her, she said, I'm coming back, and I'm going to be there. All of you don't worry, and things like that. So she thinks the party is fine. I don't think she's, any kind of a reality check. She thinks everything's all hunky-dory just because there's a particular government who's very anti-her and they've thrown her out and all of that. But she says, I'm coming, I'm back, and I'm going to take things over again, and all will be well. So that's her take, but maybe that's a front face that she wants to put up to the political party. But again, I wouldn't say the political party is in a disarray, really. They've all fled because for fear of life. I mean, they'll all be otherwise imprisoned and serving sentences. But I think she feels once she gets back, I mean, if the legal procedures don't happen or whatever the way she feels, that they all of them will come back and rally around her, which is a fact. I don't at all, disagree with that point that
So she
they would.
does, there is a chance that she has a political future in Bangladesh if she goes back.
Actually, I doubt that. I mean, I would actually think the best way to keep Awami League there strongly is if she steps back and lets other leaders take forward, which is something that in South Asia we very rarely see that. But I think that is for me the way I see, because as I mentioned earlier, it's a historical party. How do you vanish that suddenly? It doesn't. It's going to be there. There are a huge amount of people involved from it, associated with it. People have supported for through the decades. But at the same time, the misdeeds of Sheikh Hasina are far too much, far too high. I don't think after what she did, especially with the students, unarmed students, and the kind of bloodbath that we saw because of her own security apparatus doing this, I don't think she would be excused by anyone there, even people who have supported Awami League. So best case scenario for me, for Awami League, would be that she steps back in some role or the other and let others take over. And Awami League is going to be a cohesive political party. I have no doubt on that.
I want to quickly come to relations with India, Bangladesh's relations with India. Uh, we saw how India has taken some, the relations completely deteriorated in the wake of Sheikh Hasina's exit in the way it happened, and also all these incidents of communal violence coming to the fore. So we have seen a complete breakdown of relations. And I wondered if there is any attempt by Delhi to re-establish ties with the Yunus government, given that it's going to stay for some time. They're taking some important decisions, about their neighborhood. They've been reaching out to China. Uh, so, is there any attempt, apart from the meeting that we saw between Prime Minister Modi and Professor Yunus uh, during the BIMSTEC meeting, uh, is there any other attempt to establish ties? Yes, there are normal diplomatic channels are open, but is there any bigger political outreach that you see happening, or is it in the works?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, I'm not aware of any, if there's any outreach really attempt from India, but I would really think that India's very deliberately keeping quiet, like as you mentioned, some basic communication is open, but wouldn't want to do anything beyond that. And again, as we've discussed this earlier, that Yunus hasn't helped the case either. A lot of the pronunciations by Yunus about Northeast, about Lalmonihar Haat, about China, about Pakistan hasn't gone down well. I mean, apart from, of course, the communal and other issues, and the fact that we hated anybody who would take over, oust Sheikh Hasina and take over, we would hate that entity first and foremost. And in this case, as you know, Yunus and Sheikh Hasina has always had it's an individual bile problem that they've had. And of course, it now became a far larger thing. So in the first place, we don't support the interim at all. We think it's not a legitimate government, and we have lots of opinion about that. And then we don't like Yunus, also a flip off of what Sheikh Hasina's opinion about him is. And then again, much of what has happened, the minority violence was something which didn't go down well, naturally so. I mean, that wasn't going to go down well with anyone. And then we saw that mindless destruction of Mujib's house, and the crazy call for change of the entire narrative. Of course, that's all cooled down. Those elements have, I think, quietened because they've realized that there are no takers for those crazy outpouring. But clearly, we thought that security system in Bangladesh wasn't working. So we were annoyed with the interim at that point of time. There's been some instances when I think the interim wanted to reach out to India for meeting. India didn't kind of pursue that at all. So we've had a kind of a perfunctory meeting at the BIMSTEC sideline, as you mentioned. But again, as couple of things, and the Bangladesh, the China thing. I mean, this was a particular visit that he's been going for this conference for the past several years. This was not the first time. And I think to accuse him of cozying up to China is unfair, because every political leader in Bangladesh has always cozied up to China.
Sheikh
We've
Hasina had good relations with
very good relation. The kind
Beijing.
of development projects that they've been able to undertake together is fabulous. I mean, we've seen such huge projects that take place in Bangladesh all over, has been with Chinese support. And so here, but when he goes to China, then he talks about Northeast and how Bangladesh is only access to Bay of Bengal. Clearly, it's poking needle in our eye, right? I mean, we know, I mean, it's not that they're not aware of how sensitive that area is for us. And the fact that Sheikh Hasina addressed that security is exactly why we became and so closely engaged with her. So I'm sure a chief advisor is aware of that. But despite mentioning these kind of things, and of course that Pakistan factor, though I do think that so far as Pakistan is concerned, it was really Pakistan who wanted to engage more. And I mean, at this point of time, and there are a couple of public, we were on TV channels together with some of these commentators who've talked about, because we saw nice, and I think that's funny really, because we know intelligence officials go everywhere all over the world. We've not seen photo ops. I've never seen ISI doing photo ops. This is the first time we saw that happening in Bangladesh. They've been taken to Chittagong also, those kind of things. And then, of course, they're telling us about how they want to engage with them economically. I mean, Pakistan is down the rabbit hole. What economic engagement? But I think it's more of their own, wanting to push the boundary really. And again, I would say interim has also talked about that apology, which has been a very, very critical point about Bangladeshis. Because whenever I speak to Bangladeshis, my friends and others in the academia and the journalists, I mean, they didn't give any credence to this engagement with Pakistan. They said, oh, it's
Right.
just like, show off face, nothing. I mean, there's nothing happening. There's nothing substantial in it.
So you mentioned the apology. So what they really want first and foremost is for Pakistan to
Yes,
apologize
yes,
for whatever happened uh, in the lead
yes.
up to the liberation of Bangladesh.
Yeah, I mean, in the last meeting that they did, that was the point that was flagged by the interim government again. That, besides other thing, but this is something that we need to. I mean, there were, of course, other issues about this Bihari Muslims and all of that, but this is really the core where, I mean, if you recall many years ago when Musharraf had come to Dhaka on a quick visit, he was also, and he desisted from using the word apology, and he said he regretted the incidents or something like that. But that wasn't good enough for Bangladesh. As I said, Bangladesh is extremely emotive. And for them, this is something, which they hold very closely to their heart. So it's not easy for them to forget the past and engage. Of course, as another neighbor, that's a different matter. But I think the wounds of the past is still there, and that's not healed totally.
I'm going to ask you one last question. You spoke about you spoke about a fake news circulating recently that the army had taken over, the Bangladesh army had taken over. But is there a real possibility that if the army perceives Professor Yunus unable to take charge really and do what is required to rein in all these unlawful elements, Islamists, and so on, and sort of bring the country back to the straight and narrow, is there a chance that the army steps in and takes over?
I would think under the present chief of army, I would think not. I mean, he's been very clear and sharp. I mean, he's not minced his words at all, and he's been very politically there, which is unlike what the army chiefs usually are. But I think what he will find a way to rein them in. He will find a modus vivendi to ensure that that mayhem doesn't happen, because that's what he's been saying. I mean, when he talked about, if you remember, if he talked about December election, he also said that I'm not going to tolerate violence on the streets. So please, address this. So and because he's always been saying that please don't make the army come do the job of the secure police or others. Please get your act together. So he's been sending very clear messages, and I think that's not lost on anyone. I would hope that because there is, again, we know about the UN peacekeeping and many other factors actually which work against an army taking over. As I mentioned in the past, when the caretaker government was there, it was really the front face of the government, while it was a really army supported government in the interim period. So I don't. not, I mean, it's possible a similar situation like this will happen, that, if they find that Yunus completely not able to handle things, they put in somebody else and then they support it far more robustly than what they are doing. But I would think that he's sending these strong messages, which he's been doing intermittently, probably will ensure things are, basically it's a law and order problem first and foremost. And I think the interim government has to put that together. I think I would think that in the last few months, we haven't seen much such violence. We've seen people out on the street. We've seen people protesting on some bizarre desires and wishes, and which they need to roll back in. But again, it's a lot more on the police reforms. That's another thing that's happened: the police reforms, which is very essential and very critical again to ensure stability and law and order in the country.
I said one last question, but I'm going to ask you one more last question,
Sure.
which is, we were talking about the India-Bangladesh relations, and India has taken some measures which are seen widely as punitive measures against Bangladesh for the statements that Professor Yunus made in China about inviting them to come to Bangladesh and set up this trading zone with India's northeastern states. And since then, we have seen India impose some restrictions on Bangladeshi exports through the land transit routes which were earlier available to them, and also restrict Bangladeshi exports to India itself. So, how have all these restrictions gone down in Bangladesh?
I think that message has been very clearly conveyed, that what is emanating from Bangladesh is not something that India is very happy to hear. But also at the same time, I recall maybe a couple of weeks or more than that, a BBC interview by Professor Yunus, where he talks about how he says India is the most important neighbor. And this is something that I've heard from every political entity in Bangladesh. As I said, I briefly met the Jamati leader, then I met, of course, other political leaders too. And not one of them have ever said that India is not important to us, is the most important neighbor. In fact, I did ask the deputy chief Jamaat whether I can coach him on this. He said, absolutely. He says it is the most important neighbor. But again, as I said, the noises that has come out from Bangladesh hasn't endeared them to us. There were a lot of other factors why India was not happy with interim or Yunus, but this was certainly not in the right messaging. But again, I think there has been a lack of communication in some ways, and the fact that India has taken a certain position, and not wanting to make it easy for them. So clearly, the last few trade occasions, and that we saw, initially some of them were taken away because it was said that they were done in goodwill in the earlier past. Now that doesn't exist anymore, so let go. But now to make trading so difficult, and all of that has added to this kind of a, how would I say, a bit of tense bilateral relation at this point of time. But I think there is no doubt in Bangladesh, despite the kind of social media angst about India, and we find a lot of these Islamist elements saying very nasty things about India, but by and large, every political stakeholder and any urban Bangladeshi will tell you that India is a neighbor that they will have to work with, and there is no question about that. But again, we will have to see which is the kind of the political entity that emerges, because India, I think, is not in a mood to, listen to anybody who he will slightly allude to some kind of a security issue for us. I
So,
think that's a red line.
So can India really hope to pick up this relationship with an elected government after so much bad blood at this point, which will obviously leave its own mark on the relationship? So will it be able to pick up from where it left off in 2024 with an elected government whenever it comes?
I think India thinks they can. I mean, let's face it, and I don't think it's a politically correct thing to say this, but in a situation like this, the problems are faced both by Indians and Bangladeshis, right? But Indians have the capacity, larger capacity to act, to internalize the issue and move on with it. It doesn't matter. I mean, I know for sure how much the West Bengal economy has been affected because of the medical tourism not happening at this point of time. I know of how the South hospitals have been affected. But again, India has the capacity to absorb that, right? Now, Bangladesh is again, China has made it, facilitated their movement for medical tourism. They've got that started, I think Thailand or somebody else has done something, but nobody can replace India in certain basic ways, right? So that is something important to both Bangladesh and India to some extent. I mean, I think that personality closeness that we enjoyed, the leaders enjoyed, may not be there when the next elected government. And also, these last few years, there has been a large understanding in Bangladesh is that this particular government, Awami League, was able to sustain itself because India supported it. Right or wrongly, it's a perception. And that it's because of India's support, India backed it completely ignored, the things, the cracks that were very evident for quite some time, actually. So there is that angst about India on that particular front. So to say whether, so there's a huge youth groups, and especially they're very active on social media, who are very angsty about India on these issues. And we've seen that Quit India thing. Of course, that died down because end of the day, I mean, it's difficult for them to, the economy was so closely intertwined, and it should be. I think that's what is, and I've always argued that India and Bangladesh are destined to work together, and that's how it should be, because the cost of non-cooperation is so very high and high for both. Just that India has the capacity to absorb it and move along. It will hurt Bangladesh much more. So it will be in Bangladesh's interest also to, once elected government comes in place, to reach out. But whether we'll still have that warmth or not, we won't know. But I guess so far as trade and other matters, and I think the basic thing is that if Bangladesh, and I think that's what the leaders, when we speak at our own level, that security parameters are going to be safe with every political entity. Now, that is not India's experience in the past in Bangladesh. We've suffered so much under the DNP rule, right? So that is something, I think that expression of intent has to be very forcefully conveyed to India. We've heard that at private levels, but officially, I think that has to be, because for India, that's the basic red line. That if that is not addressed, nothing matters. I'm not interested in engagement with you, which is also the kind of message that is done with interim. Yes.
Professor Datta, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Nirupama. Pleasure always.